The arrival and first trial. Sarah Chin stood at the observation window of the transport shuttle, watching as Station Meridian grew larger against the backdrop of stars. The massive structure rotated slowly in orbit around Kepler 442b, its metallic surface gleaming under the light of the distant sun. Somewhere inside that enormous wheel of steel and advanced technology, she would either prove herself worthy of becoming a galactic defense soldier, or she would fail like so many humans before her. The shuttle's artificial gravity shifted as they approached the docking bay, and Sarah instinctively adjusted her stance. Years of working on her family's colony had taught her to read the subtle changes in gravity and pressure. Her fellow passengers, 3 Valerian cadets with their distinctive blue-gray skin and ridged foreheads, didn't even seem to notice. They were too busy laughing at something on their data tablets, occasionally glancing in her direction with poorly concealed amusement. Sarah knew what they found so funny. Strapped across her back, visible through the transparent security wrap, was a sword. Not an energy blade, not a plasma cutter, not even a vibro knife. Just a sword made of folded steel, 30 inches of straight blade with a simple crossguard and a handle wrapped in black cord worn smooth by generations of hands. Her great-grandfather's Jian, carried through the colony wars, passed down through her family line, and now here with her on humanity's greatest challenge. The docking procedure completed with a metallic thunk that resonated through the hull. The airlock cycled, and the shuttle door opened to reveal Station Meridian's interior. Sarah grabbed her duffel bag, adjusted the sword on her back, and stepped into her future. The intake hall was massive, designed to accommodate species ranging from the small Pixith to the towering Brenthak. Sarah, at 5 feet 6 inches, felt average by human standards but found herself dwarfed by most of the beings around her. A Kryn warrior, easily 8 feet tall with rust-colored scaled skin and 4 powerful arms, stood near the processing desk. His eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle pattern on his broad face, tracked her movement with predatory focus. Name and designation, a mechanical voice said from the processing terminal. Sarah approached and placed her hand on the scanner. Sarah Chin, Cadet Candidate, Earth Defense Initiative, Application Number HDI 7731. The terminal beeped, and a holographic display materialized showing her file. The Kryn warrior leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over her. His translator collar activated with a soft hum. "Another human," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "Tell me, small one, do you know the statistics? 41% of human candidates wash out in the first week. Another 32% fail before the first month ends. Only 16 humans have ever graduated from this facility." Sarah met his gaze, refusing to look away despite every instinct telling her to show deference to this apex predator. "Then I'll be the 17th drill master." The Kryn's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Sarah had learned meant surprise. "You know my rank. You've done your research. Good. I am Drill Master Vokhtar. I will be your primary combat instructor." He paused, his eyes focusing on the sword across her back. "What is that primitive thing you're carrying?" "A family heirloom, sir. It's called a jian. A Chinese straight sword, forged on Earth over 200 years ago." Vokhtar reached out with one of his lower arms, his 3-fingered hand surprisingly gentle as he touched the security wrap. "You brought a sharpened piece of metal to an academy that trains soldiers to fight with plasma weapons and energy shields. Explain your reasoning." Sarah had prepared for this question, had rehearsed her answer during the 3-week journey from Earth. But standing here, under the scrutiny of this massive warrior and the curious stares of dozens of other cadets, the rehearsed words felt hollow. So she told the truth instead. "My great-grandfather carried this blade when he defended the farming colony on New Hubei against raiders. He had a rifle, but when the ammunition ran out and the power cells died, he had this. He saved 47 people with this sword. My grandmother carried it during the Outer Rim conflicts. My father kept it sharp even though he never had to use it. It reminds me that humans have survived for thousands of years with nothing but steel and determination. We didn't need advanced technology to become strong. We were already strong." Silence fell across the intake hall. A Pixith cadet, no taller than Sarah's waist, giggled nervously. One of the Valorians from her shuttle made a comment in his native language that the translators didn't catch, but the mocking tone was universal. Vokhtar stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back. "Sentimental. Humans are always so sentimental. That blade will not help you here, Cadet Chin. But regulations allow personal items within reason. You may keep it. Try not to cut yourself." He gestured toward the corridor. "Barracks assignment is on your data pad. Formation in 1 hour. Do not be late." The barracks were functional and cramped, designed with modular bunks that could adjust to different species sizes and sleep requirements. Sarah found her assigned space in Section 7, a human-sized bunk in a room shared with 5 other cadets. 2 were already present, a Drajan female with iridescent scales and a telluric male whose crystalline structure refracted light in rainbow patterns. "Hello," Sarah said, setting her duffel on her bunk. "I'm Sarah Chin." The Drajan looked up from the equipment she was organizing, her vertical pupils narrowing. "Sasara," she said, the translator rendering her sibilant speech into standard Galactic common. "I am Zith. That is Coral." She gestured toward the telluric, who produced a sound like wind chimes that the translator converted to a greeting. "You are the human with the primitive blade," Coral said, his voice like musical tones. "The other cadets are already making wagers on your survival time. The current favorite is 3 days." Sarah unwrapped the sword and laid it carefully on her bunk. The blade caught the light, the folded steel pattern visible in the metal. "What are you betting?" Coral's crystalline structure shifted, creating new patterns of light. "I do not gamble. But I am curious. Why bring such a thing here?" "Because it's part of who I am," Sarah said simply. She began unpacking her gear, standard-issue training uniform, personal hygiene items, her grandmother's photo stored in a protective case. "On Earth we have a saying, know where you came from to understand where you're going. This sword reminds me of where I came from." Zith hissed softly, a sound that might have been laughter. "Philosophy will not help you in combat simulations, human. Your only strength matters. Speed matters. Skill with weapons that actually work matters." "Then I'll develop those things," Sarah said. She pulled on her training uniform, which fit better than she expected. At least the academy had accurate measurements for human proportions. "But I won't forget who I am while I'm doing it." The first formation was held in the primary training bay, a massive space with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. 217 cadets from 43 different species stood in organized rows, arranged by height with the tallest in back. Sarah found herself in the front third, surrounded by beings who looked like they could break her in half without effort. Drill Master Vaktar entered from a side door, accompanied by 3 other instructors. A Brenthak whose head nearly touched the 30-foot ceiling, a Eularian whose multiple tentacles moved with hypnotic grace, and a human. Sarah felt a surge of hope at seeing another member of her species, but it died quickly when she saw the scars on his face and the cold assessment in his eyes. This was not someone who would go easy on her because they shared a homeworld. "I am Drill Master Vaktar," the Kryn announced, his voice amplified to fill the enormous space. "These are Drill Master Throck, Drill Master Yuna, and Combat Instructor Hayes. For the next 16 weeks, we will transform you from whatever you currently are into soldiers worthy of the galactic defense. Most of you will fail. Some of you will be injured. All of you will wish you had chosen a different path." He began pacing in front of the formation, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. "The galactic defense protects 147 member worlds and countless colonies. We face threats from hostile species, rogue AI, spatial anomalies, and forces we barely understand. We cannot afford weakness. We cannot afford hesitation. We cannot afford soldiers who break under pressure." His 3 eyes scanned the formation, pausing on Sarah. "We especially cannot afford soldiers who cling to primitive weapons and outdated traditions when advanced technology is available. Sentiment is a luxury. Nostalgia is a weakness. Here you will learn to trust your equipment, your training, and your fellow soldiers. Nothing else matters." The first week was designed to break them. Physical conditioning that pushed every cadet to their limits and beyond. Sarah discovered that humans had certain advantages over some species. Her endurance was better than the Valorians, who were built for short bursts of intense activity. Her flexibility exceeded the rigid-limbed tellurics. But in raw strength, speed, and resilience, she was hopelessly outmatched by most of her fellow cadets. The obstacle course became her nemesis. A 3-mile run through terrain that shifted and changed, including walls to climb, pits to cross, and sections with altered gravity. Zith completed it in 11 minutes. Coral finished in 14. Sarah's best time was 23 minutes, and she collapsed at the finish line every single time. "Pathetic," Drill Master Vaktar said on the 3rd day, standing over her as she gasped for breath. "The enemy will not wait for you to catch your breath, Cadet Chin. They will not give you time to recover. They will kill you while you lie there wheezing." Sarah forced herself to her feet, her legs trembling. "Then I'll get faster, sir? Will you? Or will you wash out like so many humans before you?" Vaktar leaned down, bringing his massive face close to hers. I have trained 63 humans in my career, Cadet. Do you know how many graduated? 4 out of 63. The others quit, failed, or were injured so badly they had to be sent home. What makes you think you're different? Sarah thought about her great-grandfather, facing down armed raiders with nothing but a sword and determination. She thought about her grandmother, holding a defensive position for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. She thought about her father, who kept the blade sharp even in peacetime because he believed in being prepared for anything. Because they didn't quit, sir. And neither will I. Vaktar straightened up, his expression unreadable. We shall see. Run the course again. Your time starts now. The hand-to-hand combat evaluations began in week 2. Each cadet was required to demonstrate proficiency in unarmed combat against opponents of similar size and weight class. For Sarah, this meant facing other smaller species, Pixith, Drajan, and a few others. The techniques taught were universal, designed to work regardless of species physiology. Strike zones, leverage points, defensive postures that translated across different body types. Sarah stepped into the training circle across from a Pixith named Rickon, who had been making jokes about human fragility since day one. The little alien stood 3 feet tall but was dense with muscle, his gray skin tough as leather. Try not to break, human, Rickon said, his squeaky voice filled with confidence. I would hate to end your career before it truly begins. The match started. Rickon moved with surprising speed, darting in to strike at Sarah's knees. She pivoted, remembering the forms her father had taught her, movements passed down through generations of Chen family warriors. She didn't just dodge, she flowed, letting Rickon's momentum carry him past her, then striking at the nerve cluster on his shoulder that the anatomy briefings had identified as a universal weak point. Rickon squeaked in surprise and pain, stumbling. Sarah pressed the advantage, using techniques that were old when her great-grandfather was born. Sweeps, throws, joint locks adapted for different anatomies. The match lasted 45 seconds before Rickon tapped out. Silence filled the training bay. Sarah helped Rickon to his feet, offering respect to a defeated opponent as tradition demanded. The Pixith stared at her with wide eyes, then scurried away without a word. Interesting, Combat Instructor Hayes said, approaching the circle. He was the first time the human instructor had spoken directly to her. Where did you learn to fight like that, Cadet? My family, sir. We've been soldiers and farmers for generations. The techniques get passed down. Hayes studied her with those cold, scarred eyes. Old techniques. Pre-space flight martial arts. I didn't think anyone still practiced those. Some of us remember, sir. Remembering is one thing. Applying it effectively is another. Hayes gestured toward the next opponent, a Drajan twice Sarah's size. Let's see if your old methods work against someone with a real advantage. Sarah faced 7 more opponents that day. She won 3 matches, lost 4, and earned a grudging respect from cadets who had assumed she would be helpless without weapons. But it was the losses that taught her the most. Each defeat showed her where human limitations couldn't be overcome by technique alone. Where strength mattered more than skill. Where speed trumped strategy. That night, alone in the barracks while her roommates were in the recreation area, Sarah unwrapped her great-grandfather's sword. She held it, feeling the familiar weight, tracing the characters etched near the guard. Her grandmother's words came back to her. This blade has protected our family for 2 centuries not because it's special, but because the people who carried it refused to give up. The metal doesn't make you strong. Your spirit does. The emergency alarm shattered the quiet night with a sound like screaming metal. Red lights flooded the barracks as Sarah jerked awake, her training instincts taking over before her conscious mind fully engaged. Around her, other cadets were scrambling from their bunks, confusion and fear evident in their movements. All cadets to emergency stations. Vaktar's voice boomed through the station's communication system. This is not a drill. Hostile boarding detected in Section 12. This is not a drill. Sarah's hands moved automatically, pulling on her uniform, grabbing her equipment belt. Her eyes fell on the sword lying beside her bunk. Regulations said weapons were to be stored in the armory except during sanctioned training. But something deep in her gut, an instinct inherited from generations of warriors, told her to take it. She grabbed the blade and ran toward her designated emergency station, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and purpose. Behind her, she could hear Zith and Coral following, their own species' battle cries mixing with the blaring alarms. The real test was about to begin. The battle and recognition. The emergency corridors of Station Meridian were chaos incarnate. Cadets rushed in every direction, some heading to their assigned stations, others frozen by panic. Sarah moved against the flow, following the route to Emergency Station 7 that had been drilled into them during orientation. The sword bounced against her back with each step, a reassuring weight that connected her to something older and more fundamental than the advanced technology surrounding her. Chin. Combat Instructor Hayes appeared ahead, directing cadets with sharp hand gestures. His scarred face was calm despite the crisis, the mark of someone who had seen real combat. Station 7 double time. We're establishing a defensive perimeter in case the hostiles breach the training sector. Sarah nodded and increased her pace, joining a stream of cadets funneling into the training bay. The massive space had been transformed. Portable barriers had been erected, creating defensive positions. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh white and red, making shadows jump and dance. Drill Master Vaktar stood at the center, his 4 arms directing cadets into positions with military precision. Weapons from the armory. Vaktar commanded. Standard plasma rifles, setting 4. Energy shields to maximum. Drajan cadets on the elevated positions, your heat vision gives you an advantage. Valorians take point positions, your reflexes are fastest. Humans, Pixith and Telorix, secondary positions. Sarah moved to the armory station where a Eularian quartermaster was distributing weapons with her multiple tentacles. The plasma rifle felt heavy and awkward in Sarah's hands, despite weeks of training. She had qualified with it, barely, but she had never felt the connection with the weapon that the instructors emphasized. It was a tool, efficient and deadly, but it didn't feel like an extension of herself the way her great-grandfather's sword did. All positions report ready status, Hayes ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. One by one, squad leaders reported in. Sarah found herself in 3rd Squad, positioned behind the primary defensive line. Zith was to her left, her scales reflecting the emergency lights in shifting patterns. Coral stood to her right, his crystalline structure resonating with a low hum that might have been anxiety. What kind of hostiles? Zith hissed, her tongue flicking out to taste the air. Pirates? Rogue AI? Territorial species. Does it matter? Coral's voice chimed with an edge of fear. We are cadets, not soldiers. We have trained for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Then we're about to get a very practical education, Sarah said, checking her rifle's charge. The display showed full power, enough for 40 shots before needing to reload. She had 6 additional power cells on her belt. 240 shots total, assuming she didn't miss, assuming the weapon didn't malfunction, assuming she survived long enough to need them all. A massive explosion rocked the station. The floor buckled beneath them and several cadets lost their footing. Emergency force fields snapped into place across the bay's entrance, shimmering barriers designed to contain atmosphere in case of hull breach. Through the translucent energy field, Sarah could see smoke billowing from a corridor intersection. Contact, someone shouted. Section 11 breach. The hostiles emerged from the smoke like nightmares made metal and malice. They were Kresh Raiders, a species known for attacking isolated stations and colonies. Each stood 7 feet tall, their bodies a fusion of organic tissue and cybernetic augmentation. Weapons were integrated directly into their arms, plasma cannons and blade extensions that glowed with deadly heat. Open fire. Vaktar roared. The training bay erupted with the sound of plasma rifles discharging. Bolts of superheated energy streaked through the air, some finding targets, others going wide. The Kresh Raiders returned fire with devastating accuracy. One of the Valerian cadets in the front line took a direct hit, his energy shield flaring and failing. He went down hard, smoke rising from his chest armor. Sarah aimed and fired, her shots joining the barrage. The recoil felt wrong, the weapon's balance alien despite her training. Her first 3 shots went wide. The 4th clipped a Kresh Raider's shoulder, barely slowing it down. These weren't simulation targets that registered hits and played dead. These were real enemies with real armor and very real weapons. Fall back to second line. Hayes ordered as more Kresh pushed through the breach. Maintain fire discipline. The defensive line retreated in controlled chaos, cadets stumbling over each other in their haste to reach the secondary positions. A Brenthak cadet, massive and slow despite his strength, took a plasma bolt to the leg and crashed to the ground, creating a gap in the line. Then everything went wrong at once. A Kresh Raider fired something that wasn't a plasma bolt. The projectile hit the ceiling and detonated with a pulse of electromagnetic energy that rippled through the bay like a wave of invisible force. Sarah's plasma rifle died instantly, its display going dark. Around her, every electronic weapon and shield generator failed simultaneously. Energy barriers flickered and disappeared. Communication systems went silent. Even the emergency lights dimmed to emergency backup power. EMP device. Vakhtar's voice carried without electronic amplification. All cadets with inactive weapons, fall back to the evacuation corridor. Mobile forces engage with physical weapons. Physical weapons. Sarah looked down at her dead plasma rifle, now nothing more than an expensive club. The Kresh Raiders were still coming, their integrated weapons unaffected by the electromagnetic pulse because they were hardened against such attacks. The cadets were effectively disarmed. Sarah's hand moved to her back, fingers closing around the cord-wrapped handle of her great-grandfather's sword. The steel sang as she drew it from its sheath, the sound impossibly clear in the chaos. The blade caught the dim emergency lighting, 2 centuries of careful maintenance creating an edge that gleamed with purpose. "Chin, what are you doing?" Zith hissed, dropping her useless rifle. "That blade cannot stop plasma fire." "Their plasma weapons still work," Sarah said, her voice calmer than she felt. "Ours don't. But this." She held up the sword. "This never runs out of power. This never needs a battery. This worked 200 years ago and it works now." A Kresh Raider burst through the confused cadets, its blade extensions glowing as it targeted the fallen Brenthak. The massive cadet tried to crawl away, his injured leg trailing behind him. The Raider raised its arm, preparing to deliver a killing blow. Sarah moved without thinking, muscle memory from years of practice taking over. She covered the distance in 4 running steps, brought the sword up in a rising cut that her father had taught her, that his mother had taught him, that her great-grandfather had used to defend colonists 2 centuries ago. The blade met the Kresh Raider's extended arm and bit deep, finding the gap between cybernetic plating and organic tissue. The Raider screamed, a sound like metal grinding. It spun toward her, its other arm coming around with frightening speed. Sarah was already moving, dropping low and rolling as the plasma cannon fired over her head. She came up inside the Raider's guard, where its long-range weapons couldn't track her, and thrust upward with both hands on the sword's grip. The blade found the softer armor at the Raider's neck joint, the spot where organic met cybernetic, and punched through. The Kresh Raider staggered and fell, its systems shutting down. Sarah pulled her blade free, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She had just killed something. Not a simulation target, not a practice dummy. A living being that had been trying to kill her and her fellow cadets. "Behind you." Coral's chiming voice cut through her shock. Sarah spun, bringing the sword up in a defensive position. 2 more Kresh Raiders were advancing, having seen her kill their comrade. They split apart, trying to flank her. She couldn't fight both simultaneously, not with their reach advantage and integrated weapons. But she wasn't alone. Zith charged from the left, having grabbed a piece of broken barrier as a makeshift weapon. Coral came from the right, his crystalline structure changing shape to form sharp edges along his arms. The Raiders divided their attention, trying to track multiple threats. Sarah didn't hesitate. She went for the closer Raider, using footwork her grandmother had drilled into her. Step, pivot, slash. The sword moved in patterns older than spaceflight, techniques developed when humans fought with nothing but steel and skill. She struck at joints, weak points, gaps in armor. The Raider tried to track her with its plasma cannon, but she stayed too close, moving faster than its targeting systems could compensate. A blade extension nearly took her head off. Sarah ducked under it, feeling the heat singe her hair, and came up with a horizontal slash that severed the hydraulic lines in the Raider's knee. It stumbled, and she pressed the advantage, her sword finding the vulnerable spot at its spine where organic nerves connected to cybernetic systems. The second Raider went down under Zith and Coral's combined assault. Around them, other cadets were realizing that the EMP had leveled the playing field. Valorians used their natural speed to dodge and strike. Drajan employed their claws and tails. A group of Pixith worked together to bring down a Raider by sheer numbers and determination. Defensive line, reform on Cadet Chin. Hayes's voice cut through the battle. The scarred instructor had armed himself with a piece of metal railing, wielding it like a staff. Use her as your anchor point. Sarah barely had time to process the order before cadets were forming up around her position. She found herself at the center of a defensive semicircle, her sword held ready as more Kresh Raiders pushed into the bay. But something had changed. The cadets weren't panicking anymore. They were fighting with whatever they had, improvising, adapting, surviving. A massive 4-armed figure crashed into the fray. Drill Master Vakhtar had abandoned his position at the command center and entered the battle directly. He wielded 2 pieces of metal barrier in his upper arms and fought with his lower arms bare. A Kresh Raider made the mistake of engaging him. Vakhtar moved with brutal efficiency, his combat experience evident in every strike. The raider went down in seconds. But more kept coming. The breach was still open, and the Kresh seemed determined to capture or destroy the training facility. Sarah's arms burned with fatigue, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sword felt heavier with each swing, but she kept moving, kept fighting, kept her fellow cadets alive through sheer determination. Then Vaktar was beside her, fighting back-to-back with her against the press of raiders. His 3 eyes flickered to her sword between strikes, and Sarah saw something in his expression change. Recognition, perhaps. Or memory. That blade, Vaktar growled between impacts. Those patterns in the metal. Chin, you said your great-grandfather carried it? What was his name? Marcus Chin. Sarah shouted back, deflecting a blade extension and countering with a thrust that found a raider's power core. He fought in the colony wars on New Hubei. Vaktar froze for half a heartbeat, enough that a raider nearly got past his guard. He recovered, smashing the attacker aside, but his 3 eyes were now fixed on Sarah with an intensity that had nothing to do with the battle. New Hubei. The farming colony raid 37 years ago. There was a human with a sword like that. He saved my battalion when we were cut off from support. Vaktar's voice carried a weight of emotion Sarah had never heard from the stern drill master. We had run out of ammunition, our energy weapons were dead. The raiders had us surrounded. Then this human appeared with 47 colonists, and they held the line with farming tools and that sword while we evacuated the wounded. Sarah's eyes widened. That was you? You were there. I was a junior warrior then, fresh from my homeworld, arrogant and inexperienced. Your great-grandfather taught me that technology is a tool, but will is what wins battles. He fought for 6 hours with that blade, never yielding, never breaking. Vaktar's upper arms struck down another raider while his lower arms gestured toward Sarah's sword. I swore an oath that day. If I ever encountered that blade again, I would honor it and the warrior who carries it. A massive explosion rocked the station. Through the emergency force fields, Sarah could see Galactic defense ships arriving, real military vessels with experienced crews. The cavalry was coming, but the battle wasn't over yet. All cadets, fighting withdrawal to evacuation corridor 7. As ordered. Move in pairs, cover each other. The retreat was controlled chaos. Sarah found herself still at the center of the formation, her sword red with hydraulic fluid and worse things. Zith and Coral stayed close, the 3 of them forming a unit that moved and fought with surprising synchronization despite having trained together for only 2 weeks. They were 10 meters from the evacuation corridor when disaster struck. A Kresh raider, larger than the others and covered in heavier armor, smashed through the defensive line. It targeted the wounded, the cadets who couldn't move quickly enough. Its plasma cannon charged, aimed at 3 injured cadets being carried by their squad mates. Sarah didn't think. She ran, her exhausted legs finding speed she didn't know she had left. She threw herself between the raider and its targets, bringing her sword up in a 2-handed guard position. The plasma bolt hit the blade. Physics said it shouldn't have worked. Plasma should have melted the steel, should have killed her and everyone behind her. But 2 centuries of careful maintenance, of folding and refolding the metal, of tempering and sharpening and caring for the blade, had created something stronger than it had any right to be. The plasma dispersed along the blade's edge, the folded steel channeling the energy away from the center. The sword glowed red-hot, and Sarah's hands screamed in pain where they gripped the handle, but the blade held. The raider hesitated, its targeting systems confused by what had just happened. That moment of confusion was all Vaktar needed. The drill master hit the raider like a meteor, all 4 arms moving in devastating coordination. The fight was over in seconds. Vaktar turned to Sarah, who was staring at her sword in disbelief. The blade was still glowing faintly, heat radiating from the metal. Old earth forging techniques, he said quietly. Your ancestors knew how to make steel that would last. That would endure. That would protect. The Galactic Defense Security Forces swept through the station systematically, clearing out the remaining Kresh raiders with professional efficiency. The cadets were evacuated to a secure section while medical teams treated the wounded. Sarah sat with her back against a wall, her hands wrapped in burn gel, her sword laid across her knees. The blade had cooled but bore new scars from the plasma bolt, dark marks that would never fully polish out. Zith settled beside her, the Drajan scales dulled by exhaustion. You saved us. That primitive blade saved us when all our advanced technology failed. The blade is just steel, Sarah said, echoing her grandmother's words. It was the people who made the difference. All of us, fighting together. Philosophical perhaps, Coral chimed from her other side, but also accurate. We were warriors today, not just cadets. Drill Master Vaktar approached, his massive frame somehow less intimidating than before. In his upper right hand he carried something wrapped in cloth. He knelt before Sarah, bringing his three eyes level with hers, and held out the bundle. "This belonged to your great-grandfather," Vaktar said. "He gave it to me 37 years ago, said I should keep it until I found someone worthy of carrying his legacy." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a second sword, identical to Sarah's but with different characters etched near the guard. "He carried 2 blades that day. Used one to save my life directly. I have maintained this blade with the same care he showed, waiting for this moment." Sarah stared at the sword, then at Vaktar, her burned hands forgotten. "I don't understand. Your great-grandfather told me that a true warrior doesn't need advanced weapons to be dangerous. They need skill, determination, and the will to protect others. He said that humans had survived for millennia with nothing but steel and spirit, and that we would still be standing when empires built on technology had crumbled to dust." Vaktar's 3 eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears. "I didn't fully understand then. I was young, proud of my people's strength and technology. But that day, watching 47 farmers and 1 swordsman hold off an army to save us, I learned what true strength means." He laid the second sword across Sarah's knees beside her own blade. "That weapon carries history. It carries honor. It carries the spirit of warriors who refused to quit when everything said they should. Your great-grandfather made me promise that if I ever found another human who understood that lesson, I would give them this blade and treat them not as a weak species to be protected, but as a warrior to be respected." Around them, cadets had gathered, watching in silence. Hayes stood at the back of the crowd, his scarred face showing something that might have been approval. Zith's scales shimmered with reflected light. Coral hummed a resonant note that sounded like reverence. Sarah reached out with her bandaged hands and touched the second blade. The steel was the same as her great-grandfather's sword, folded and refolded until it was stronger than it had any right to be. The characters etched near the guard read Buchu, unyielding. "I'm not him," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just a farmer's daughter who wanted to prove humans could make a difference." Vaktar stood, and in a gesture that shocked every being present, the massive Kryn warrior bowed. It was a deep bow, the kind reserved for equals, for respected adversaries, for heroes. "You are Marcus Chen's descendant. You carry his blade and his spirit. You stood when others fell. You fought when weapons failed. You protected the wounded when death came for them." His voice carried through the assembled crowd. "You are exactly who he was. A warrior who refuses to quit, who turns limitations into advantages, who remembers that strength comes not from technology but from the will to endure." He straightened, his 3 eyes blazing with conviction. "From this moment forward, I do not train you as a weak human who needs special consideration. I train you as the warrior you proved yourself to be today. If you graduate from this academy, and I now believe you will do so not because I made allowances, but because you earned it through blood and steel and the same determination that carried your ancestors through centuries of warfare." The other cadets began to shift, expressions changing from mockery to respect. Even the Valorians who had laughed at her primitive weapon now looked at her differently. She wasn't the weak human anymore. She was the cadet who had fought with a sword when energy weapons failed, who had stood between death and her fellow soldiers, who had carried forward a legacy that stretched back through generations. Sarah stood, her legs shaky but steady enough. She held both swords, feeling the weight of them, the history of them, the responsibility of them. "I won't let you down, Drill Master. I won't let any of you down. And I won't let my great-grandfather's legacy down." "I know you won't," Vaktar said. "Because humans don't quit. You're too stubborn, too determined, too willing to fight with whatever you have. That's why 16 humans have graduated from this academy despite every physical disadvantage. That's why humanity survived when bigger, stronger, faster species would have failed. And that's why the Galactic defense needs humans like you, Cadet Chen. Not because you're the strongest or the fastest, but because when everything fails, when technology breaks, when hope seems lost, humans keep fighting with whatever they have left." He turned to address all the assembled cadets. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Advanced technology is a gift, but it is not what makes a warrior. A warrior is made by will, by determination, by the refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. Today you all learned that lesson. Today you all became warriors." The medical officer approached to treat Sarah's burns properly, but she paused long enough to look at each of the cadets who had fought beside her. Zith, Coral, the Valorians who had stopped making jokes, the Pixith who had fought with unexpected ferocity, even the massive Brenthak who was being treated for his leg wound. They had all proven something today. As the medic led her away, Sarah glanced back at Vaktar. The drill master stood with his forearms crossed, watching her with something that looked like pride. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement between warriors. Sarah Chin had come to Station Meridian as a farmer's daughter with a family sword and something to prove. She would leave 16 weeks from now as a graduate of the Galactic Defense Academy. Not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she carried something more important than physical advantages. She carried the legacy of warriors who had refused to quit, who had fought with steel and determination, who had proven that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology but the absolute refusal to give up. The sword that her great-grandfather had carried, that had saved Vaktar's battalion 37 years ago, would continue to serve. Not as a relic of a primitive past, but as a reminder that some things, some values, some strengths never become obsolete. Steel could be folded and refolded until it became unbreakable. The human spirit was the same. And across the galaxy, that was what made humanity dangerous, respected, and ultimately unstoppable.